We've got a great panel lined up. I want to thank a few people before we get started. Particularly, I want to thank Hootsuite for hosting us here. And I also want to thank our panelists, Shayna, Plaut from SFU, Majd Agha from Syria, well, yes. Carolyn Dailly from ISSBC, and Suleman, who is from Zool, Immigration Services, or Immigration Lawyers, is that right? Okay. I'll be doing individual bios as we go. Just a few administrative things before we get started tonight. First of all, we're going to be filming. My board chair, Lewis, is over here in the corner. So if you don't want to be in the video, please just stay out of his way. We are also going to be live streaming tonight's talk, so that we're going to be trying to engage people online. So if you want to tweet and try to get the conversation going, we do have a hashtag, which is PeaceGeeks, and so I'd encourage you to use that. And I think that those, and I guess the final thing is we like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional unceded indigenous territories of the Coast Salish, in particular the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh. And so I just want to be mindful of that this evening. So I think that's everything for the introduction, and I want to welcome up our first speaker, Carolyn Dailly, who will be joining us, and I'll be telling you a little bit about her. And we're going to do individual interviews, and then we'll bring everybody up on stage for a moderator Q&A. And then you have an opportunity for the last half hour to ask any questions that you might like of the panelists. So come on up, Carolyn. And so I'll just briefly.
Anything else just that?
Sure. Okay. So Carolyn Dailly is the manager and assistant program, manager of Resettlement Assistance Programs at ISS of BC, which is providing temporary accommodation and resettlement services to all government-assisted refugees coming to BC. Prior to joining ISS of BC, Carolyn was ED of a small nonprofit organization assisting African immigrants and homeless people in Paris. She's going to be focusing a little bit on the current refugee context and the impact on BC and her organization going forward.
So yeah, I'll start with giving you a little bit of an overview of the Syrian crisis, as we call it now. Just a few numbers. Before the war started, it was about 20 million Syrians in Syria. Do you have an idea of how many Syrians already fled the country? About 5 million, probably a bit more now because that's 2 or 3 weeks ago. There are very likely 7 to 8 maybe millions people who are internally displaced. So they are still in Syria, but not in their hometown, and they have often not been able or didn't want yet to leave the country. And I think another thing that's quite interesting is that it's estimated that 5 to 8 million are preparing to leave. So what we're seeing now is probably the beginning or maybe the middle, but I think what is important to know is that a lot of people are still trying to get out of Syria. Another thing that I heard recently and just made me think is that people who already left the country were probably the ones who had the most resources. They probably were educated, knew people outside of Syria, had money, or all that enough to live. And the ones who are still there and possibly trying to leave now are probably the ones who are not as healthy or mobile or don't have as much money or etc. So they're probably more vulnerable than the people that are already on the road. How do I get to that? You know what? I'll show that after. Well, we can show that after. That's just a little animation that shows you the people leaving the country. So we'll look at that after. I just also wanted to show one image because I don't have a TV at home. I haven't seen much images, but when I saw that one, I just fixed myself. That's Kobané. So the idea is also to give you, to put in perspective the Canadian response to the crisis. So I'll give a few numbers about where the refugees are mostly, and we'll try to see, give you that perspective. Most refugees, we talk a lot about people who are in Germany or somewhere in Europe, and we're starting to talk about Syrian refugees possibly coming here, but most of them are in the neighborhood countries. This is, that was July, numbers for July. So it says 1.8 million in Turkey. I just heard this week that it's probably about 2.5 million right now, just for Turkey. Lebanon, over 1 million, and Lebanon is 4 million residents, forbidden Lebanese. So that's 25% of the population, which would mean about 9 million if we use that scale in Canada. If we took 25% refugees, there would be 9 million refugees. Jordan, it's also, so 600 something thousand, it's also about 25%. This shows the route that people are taking to go to Germany often. Germany and Sweden are the two countries who have responded the most quickly and who are taking the larger numbers right now. Germany, I think right now that they were saying 800,000. Now it's more about 1 to 1.5 million people coming. They're refugee claimants, which means that they get to Germany and they will claim asylum. Doesn't mean that everybody's going to be recognized as a refugee. I heard an estimate of a third that will likely be recognized as refugees. So that means that 2/3 of these people will possibly have to go back, or will not be allowed to stay in Germany, likely. This is just a few numbers about the resettlement. Resettlement is, UNHCR is, when someone is a refugee, there are 3 solutions, durable solutions. Either you can go back to your country after a little while, or you can integrate in the country, your first country of asylum. So for example, integrate in Lebanon or Turkey, or you can be resettled in a third country. These are the numbers, 35,000 in Germany, 1,000 in France. The estimate, UNHCR is asking for 100,000 places for Syrians right now. Canada, until a few weeks ago, was had pledged for 11,000. Now we are waiting to hear about the 25,000 that the Liberals said they would bring in. It's likely to happen, but we don't know when and what time frame. But that gives you an idea of, that's a little drop, I think, in what is needed. So that was the, let's go back to that. That's just the general overview. I know you had a few questions about the media, and so maybe I'll jump on that. The questions, and I think the theme of the night was also how did the media help or didn't help? Just for us, it's true that since that picture in September, our life at work has changed quite a bit. All of a sudden, people are interested in refugees and returning calls, or so we're seeing a lot of interest. We're also wondering if it had an impact on the elections, and for sure that the new government is responding or is going to respond in a more positive sense than the former government about refugees. So it will probably, I think it has had an impact on our work and the media hype. It's a little difficult to say more than that. I don't know, what was it. And I just wanted to touch, because the idea was also to ask, what's happening here and what we're doing. So as I said, 25,000 refugees are likely to, Syrian refugees, that's in addition to the regular numbers of refugees coming, but are likely to come, whether within the next 2 months or 6 or maybe 1 year. Here in Vancouver, so ISS is working with all the government-assisted refugees, so refugees who are sponsored by the Canadian government, and we are currently building a new welcome house where all refugees, government-assisted refugees, come and stay for the first 2 weeks they spend in Canada. So that's just a little idea of what it's going to look like on Victoria Drive and 11th. This might not happen to all 2,500 to 3,000 Syrians who are likely to come to BC, because we won't have enough space for everybody. The response is largely going to depend on how fast people are coming. If 500 refugees come in a month or two, we'll have to use hotels or kind of emergency shelters. If it's scattered on a longer period, then we'll be able to use our regular places. Just to finish on what, is that okay? We will we'll have a press release on Tuesday at ISS BC, and we will send a call for volunteers to help us once we know again, how many refugees are coming and when. But we'll need volunteers to help orient refugees, be what we call hosts, and help the refugees in their first days. We'll do the professional work, the paperwork, the orientations, but we'll need people to possibly do accompaniment and things like that. So, and we'll possibly send a call for housing. So if you're interested and if you want to know how you can help, there might be options. You can check ISS website. There will be more information there as of next Tuesday, and you can respond to that. Just one last thing I heard recently I thought was really good is because a lot of people are coming forward. They want to sponsor refugees, and someone who's working with sponsorship organization was saying, remember that everybody, there are people like you and me. They are not little angels, and I think that's really important because we see a lot of people who want to help, and just remember that it might not be very easy because people are going to come with lots of trauma and lots of stories, and so just remember that. Thank you. Sorry. So that is each little point here represents, each little point represents 25 people. We can just let it grow, and you'll see the numbers of people in the end. So these are all refugees moving to different countries in Europe.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. I really appreciate your giving us the context here. This is the biggest refugee crisis since World War II, and there's a lot of, I think we still don't totally understand the numbers and appreciate what's going on, so it's really helpful to have that context as we go into the next part of this conversation. Zool, you're all here up on the stage. Tonight. First of all, just tell us about who you are and what you do.
So my name is Zool Suleman. I practice immigration, refugee, and citizenship law, and I've been doing so since 1992. I'm originally born in Uganda, so I'm one of those group of people who came as refugees in 1972 from Uganda. And so when people talk about an airlift of a couple of thousand people, I was a part of that airlift. I arrived on a chartered plane. I ended up in Montreal. I went to a camp. I got my first winter coat in the camp. And then we were shipped to Vancouver. We stayed in a hotel in downtown Vancouver for must have been about 6 or 7 months. And then the story kind of stops. So the story starts again that I was originally going to be an entertainment lawyer. I went to UBC and went to Dailly Law School, and I ended up clerking at the Federal Court of Appeal in Ottawa for a year. And one of the things they do there at that time were judicial review applications for refugees. And my job was every week to render my opinion to my judge privately about whether he should hear an appeal or not. And he would make his decision. And so I saw hundreds and hundreds of cases of people who felt they'd been wrongly adjudicated. So that converted my love from kind of entertainment law into refugee law. And so that's my context. And in my practice, we do activist work in terms of helping refugees and immigrants. We say bad things about the government. We help people, and we will never get a government appointment. But that's nice. And so I think there's a need for me both in and out of the system, and that's actually an interesting kind of middle space. So that's a bit about me.
Thank you. There's a very big distinction both in terms of the definition and in terms of entitlements and rights between refugee, displaced, and migrant. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I mean, the one thing you have to remember is not everybody who seeks refuge is a refugee. So let me repeat that. Not everybody who seeks the refuge is a refugee. You know, we think that if people are running away from a war or an earthquake, that they're refugees. And as the first presenter has shown, if you're internally displaced, technically you're not a refugee. You have to be outside your country, generally speaking, to be accepted as a refugee under the United Nations Convention on Refugees. There are conventions on war, there are conventions on victims of war, there are conventions on people running away from civil strife. And so a refugee is a very specific thing. And in Canadian law, a refugee is a very specific thing. And so one of the things people conflate all the time is if you're running away from something, you're a refugee. Well, you may be seeking refuge, but as we've noticed, for instance, the German government is saying, yes, we might have 1.5 million people here, but only about a third of them will meet our definition of what a refugee is in Germany. So what about those million people? They're not refugees. They didn't go through a war. They didn't run away. Clearly they did. So you have to understand what it means to be a refugee legally. And then the notion of a migrant. People speak about that we have a migrant crisis. And some people speak of illegal migrants, legal migrants, right? There are all these issues going on. And so even the notion of the word migrant, so you notice in American media, which I'm touching on, is that the media agencies have started to be very careful about the words they use. So they'll speak about migrants or people who are dispossessed, those kinds of terms. So it is kind of a loaded arena in terms of what words you use and what they actually mean.
Can you talk a little bit about the process about how people get to Canada, how refugees get to Canada in the first place? Who decides? Where does that decision take place? And what are the implications here? How do families who are wanting to sponsor, how do they decide what families they're going to take on?
So governments hate irregular migration. So I'll repeat that again. Governments hate irregular migration. Irregular migration is migration that they have not authorized. So the government of Canada, particularly the last government, but we can go back further, have vilified people who show up on our borders or inside our borders, and they keep calling them queue jumpers. They're illegal, they're bad people, they're security risks. These are all those people, by the way, who we think of as refugees. And then regular migration is that quota that we're going to take of 11,300 people that this organization and others will help. That's regular migration. Those are the good refugees. The ones who stand in line, who go through an adjudication, who get picked, and sometimes sit there for decades. Let's not forget that the Syrian crisis is a Syrian, Iraqi, Afghani, Eritrean crisis, let alone the other 9 countries on that list. So we're focusing on this huge calamity, but it's a Syrian, Afghani, Eritrean, there's a lot going on here, okay? And the government itself can't keep its language straight. Is this a program for Syrians? Is it a program for refugees? Is it a program for Syrians and Iraqis? And depending on where you look, it's not clear. But generally speaking, there are the refugees we want, and we want legally, and we go shop for them. They're sitting in camps, UNHCR refugee camps, they're sitting outside camps, but they actually have identification, and have actually been accepted as refugees. Those are the clean ones. They meet a list, they've been checked up, and we can take them. We take so few. We just take a shockingly low amount of these people. We're talking thousands when the demand is millions. You have entire families growing up into second generations as refugees, if you count the Palestinians, for instance, or other dislocations. So this is a multi-generational problem. Secondly, you can self-select. We can be irregular and get to our border. Canada is a world leader in stopping refugees from getting to our borders. These are the stories that never make it in the Globe and Mail or the CBC or other places. Canada is a leader in stopping refugees from getting to our borders. And 3 oceans makes that really easy. And having the most militarized country in the world on the southern border makes it even easier. But if you're in Europe, obviously, it's a lot harder to protect your borders. So when we stand up there and bang and drum and speak about we want to help refugees, the other side of it is we make it exceedingly difficult and we criminalize them, at least the people who help them until they get here. So they're the ones we select from refugee camps who are approved, they're the ones who select themselves. And then there are these middle groups where private group people can go and choose. And until the law changed about a year or 2 years ago in October, there were these group of 5 refugee applications. 5 people could get together, they could be family members, and actually sponsor somebody who was a refugee or someone who was in a refugee-like scenario, meaning they couldn't go back. So Tamils who were living in southern India who could not go back to a viable solution in Sri Lanka could have a group of 5 individuals sponsor them. I represented a family that did that. So they passed their interview. Great. So in the old days, you just make a new application. So I did that with an Afghani family in Islamabad. We made 2 applications, and the second time, it all worked out. Except the law changed. The previous government said after October, I think it's 2013, was it 2014? About a year ago, a while ago. Yeah. They basically, a group of 5 could only sponsor somebody who was classified as a refugee under the strict definition and selected by the UNHCR. So now there was a major chokehold on private sponsors wanting to take people. And so in the middle of the campaign, as you noticed, or you might have noticed, in fact, the most current media release on the immigration website, if you go there tonight, it might change tomorrow, was the last statement made by the former minister saying that the definition of refugee there'll be a presumption that if you're Syrian and outside Syria, you are a refugee. You no longer need to go through a multi-part exam or to be accepted by the UNHCR. So it's a fast-moving scenario right now as to who gets to be a refugee and the different ways you can bring them in.
Well, and I think you explained to me that, because in our conversation yesterday, we talked about the fact that there had been quotas. One of my questions had been, why aren't there more people vetted? And you know, there's this barrier that's preventing people from getting here. So why aren't more people vetted? And I think you bring in the fact that.
Well, you know, I read the story, and I think the other panelists may know more than me, but the UNHCR, you only feed a supply where there's a demand. Okay, so what if the UNHCR approved 9 million refugees? What would happen? Well, there isn't a demand for 9 million, right? You saw the quota, we're taking, what, 130 or something like that? At least the UNHCR the box there was for around a framework of 130,000. So the UNHCR, from my understanding, is not in the game of pre-qualifying more than can be brought in. Because pre-qualification has implications. When you declare someone a refugee, you have to look after them. You can't deport them. You can't terrorize them. You shouldn't be incarcerating them. You shouldn't be taking their children away from them. You should be giving them health care. You should actually be trying to stabilize their lives. And the countries where these people who are quote-unquote refugees, without the full designation yet, all of those nasty things can happen to them. So for well over 10 or 20 years now, Afghanis have been going into northern Pakistan, into the northwest frontier province, okay? That jiggly bit of land that nobody knows what's going on over there. The Pakistanis deny what's going on, the Afghanis keep blaming them, the Americans bomb there, fun things are going on in the northwest frontier province. And in the middle of all of that, there are millions of undocumented Afghanis. So when you're undocumented in a country, you're subject to harassment, you're subject to all sorts of things, you cannot be protected. So what the government of Pakistan does is they hand out Northwest Frontier ID cards. It's like a little piece of cardboard with some print on it that says Northwest Frontier Province, and it's an ID card, right? And what does that ID card entitle you to? Well, it entitles you to when you're harassed, they know who they're harassing. But it also entitles you to rights, a blanket, some very basic level of care, right? But they won't give them the full refugee designation because I don't think Pakistan is a full signatory to the convention. I don't think it is. It may be, but I don't think so. If it is, it's certainly a signatory with major exemptions. So you can sign a convention and say, we believe in all this. By the way, here are all the things we won't adhere to. There are all these schedules we won't adhere to. Okay. Turkey, I don't think is a signatory, and if it is, I don't think it's a full signatory. India isn't. As the Nepalese have discovered in India, because India wants to keep China happy, they're very reluctant to do nice things for the Nepalese for the Tibetans who've been displaced. So they keep them in limbo with these ID cards. So that's the dynamic of kind of what's going on out there, at least the little bit that I know. So the UNHCR is not even pumping out the designations. They might now, because there's more demand. But frankly, 25,000 in the scheme of the numbers you just saw and that you're going to see, you can do the math. It's not, I would say it's not even a short, it's not 1%. It's a shockingly low amount.
All right, thank you so much, Zool. We're going to bring you up and to ask some more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to welcome Majd to the floor. All right, Majd is a Syrian refugee who arrived in Canada on the 9th of July. Is currently studying bioinformatics at Langara College. He's got an interesting journey that I'm going to ask him briefly about, but he's interested really in focusing on the question of how we can do more to help other Syrian refugees get to Canada, get the kind of assistance that they would need. So, yeah, I just want to welcome Majd to the stage.
Thank you very much.
So, Majd, yeah, let's start out with your story. Just give us a bit of an overview. How did you get here? Where did you go?
So in 2012, I was a student in back home. I was a business administration student in my graduation year. When I got my diploma, and things started getting really intense. Everyone was leaving, and unfortunately, we as Syrians, they would not allow us to go to any place without getting a visa, which is nearly impossible. And before we had war, we used to travel freely wherever we want. And like it was normal, like for any other citizen. But after war, they wouldn't let us go anywhere. Even for like some of our like neighbors countries now stopped us from going. Like Lebanon, we didn't have to go there we didn't need visa. Egypt, all of these countries require visa for us not to go. So unfortunately, we had no other option but to go illegally to seek asylum in Europe, because once we get there, they would give us refuge. The gentleman said, but it was a really hard road to get there, especially in winter, because if you're planning to go to Europe, you're going to have to go all the way from Turkey and then go to Greece, but you have to cross a river to go from Turkey to Greece, and in winter it's really, really dangerous. You probably heard about how many people are drowning every day because of the boats. You probably heard about the little boy who drowned a couple months ago as well in Turkey. So then there was like someone I met in Syria. He gave me the worst idea ever to go to Europe. He's like, why don't you go to Russia? And from Russia you'll go to wherever you want, because we're on the border, right? So I was like, okay, well, I was going to Russia anyways to continue studying there, so I'll go and see how things go. So I get my fake passport. Sorry. I get my fake passport, right? And it's Italian. Really Italians, right? So I go to the Damascus airport, and there's like probably literally like 6 passengers there traveling, because the whole airport is empty. Like I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna get caught now, right? So if I get caught in Damascus, they would literally like, I don't want to tell you they're gonna go away. So I got there, and I had different birthday date on my passport, and it says I'm under 18 back then. And I was like, I didn't read it, right? I just saw my name, my picture on the passport, and that's it. So I went there, and the guy was like, he took it, he was checking my passport, and he took it and like went away, right? I was like, oh my god, I got caught. They're gonna kill him. And then he goes with my passport and comes back. He goes like, you can't travel. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go home. I was like, oh no, you have to get your parents here. I'm like, oh my god, like I'm in trouble. He was like, I was like, what's the problem? He was like, well, you're under 18 here, so you cannot travel without guardians. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll call my parents. And the other guy next to me was like, just let him go, he's Italian. Like, his parents probably doesn't care, so just let him go. I'm like, okay, whatever. He stabbed me, and like, I went. I swear to God. And then they were like, do you speak Italian? I'm like, si. I don't even know if that was Italian, but I probably figured he wouldn't even know. So I passed, and I went from Damascus to Russia, and then I had 2 tickets, right? I had to go from Russia to Sweden. I was heading to Sweden. I had so many friends there, like Sweden it is. So in Moscow, when you arrive there, when you go from Syria to Russia, there's 2 airports. There's the local airport, which they made for the Syrians for some reason, and then there's the other airport, which is Shayna, which is the international. So I arrived to Vnukovo, which is the airport that takes the Syrians, and the lady on the stamping the road, she was like, wait, like looking at my passport, looking at my passport. 20 minutes I spent there just waiting until she lets me go, and there was like 7 people behind me only. So she took all the time she needs to check it out, and she keeps telling me, "Are you Italian?" I'm like, "I'm Italian." She was like, "Do you speak Italian?" I'm like, "I don't speak Italian. My mom is Italian." And then, whatever, like later she let me pass, and I had to go like 1 hour road from that airport to the other airport. They caught me there. Well, I entered the airport, and then there was like a couple people with me. They were traveling exactly the same way. They had also like fake passports and stuff. So we were at different what do you call it? Where you have like stand. Yeah, of course. Okay. So we were at the different, like each one of us had different like person to help us out with it. They passed, they finished, and they went away. I was like, okay, I'm getting there and I'm going as well. The second she called me, I was like, the second I entered, she took the passport, she did like swipe it once, and she took it and she went away, like right away. And then she was like, could you please wait for me here inside? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So she goes, some officer comes and they take me to a different room, right? And I had to wait for like 6 hours there. Nobody spoke to me, nobody said anything to me, they just like kept me in the room. It was a really fancy room, but still, I was like really... And then after 6 hours they came back and were like, oh, this is fake passport, we're gonna call Italian embassy as well. I was like, yeah, okay, call that Italian. I was insisting that I'm Italian, like, right? I'm Italian, I'm gonna sue you guys, and blah, blah, blah. And they were like, yeah, and then the officer was like, we're gonna call the embassy, and if you're actually Italian, we're gonna pay you, and we're gonna apologize and whatever, all this stuff. Like, yeah, you better. And I was like, you know what, I don't want to mess with the Russians, I'll just tell you. So I was like, you know what, yeah, I just did that, all of that. They actually understood it, and they brought all the people who came with me because they checked us on the camera. They saw we were all going together, right? So they brought us all back, and I had to spend 1.5 years, 14 months in Russia, but not in jail. I was out. So, yeah, I had to wait for 14 months for my court. Then in 2 minutes, literally, I entered the court. The judge, that's really funny. The judge was drunk. It was her birthday. Right? She entered and she was like, yeah, whatever, and she stamps for us and she goes like, yeah, go. That's it. For like 14 months, for 2 minutes I was waiting only for a signature and then let me go. And then I had to go back to Lebanon because I wasn't able to go back to Syria. And I spent a couple of months in Lebanon, then I went to Turkey. From Turkey I went back to Lebanon, then I went to Turkey, then I went back to Lebanon. I know, right? Then I went to Thailand. And we did exactly the same mistake. Fake passport. Sorry, it's just funny. I'm sorry. But then we got caught, but then when we got caught, I was like, okay, that's it. I'm not going to spend like $1 billion a month in the country, right? So I called UNHCR, and they came and rescued us.
And you eventually ended up in the Philippines.
Oh yeah, after we were recognized refugees, we actually had to go to a transit area from Thailand, and their transit area is the Philippines, so we had to spend like 3-4 months there. But the good thing, we were never in jail. Like, after everything I did, I never went to jail. Wow.
We're glad to have you here. That's quite
thank you.
You talked to me about wanting to focus a lot on how we can help, how Canadians can do more. I guess one of the questions that I have for you is, what do you see are the opportunities for Canadians to do more to engage in these issues, both potentially from an awareness raising perspective or from resettlement perspective once people do get here. Also in terms of, I think from a broader point of view, we need to prevent these types of issues from happening in the first place. So what are some of the, are there potential for, or what is the potential for Canada to play, but also for Canadians to play in helping to both prevent but also respond to the crisis as well? That's a very massive question, I realize.
That's fine. Well, to be honest, I think there's not really, like, there's few things we can all do, like, because we can't really exceed their powers, right? So as citizens, there's not much they can do. They can do donations. They can volunteer with human rights organizations to help the newcomers to try to see what do they need, what stuff they're missing and stuff. This is what they're doing in Europe. So I had a couple of friends telling me about it, like because there is a lot of Syrians arriving now to Austria in general. Because my friends in Austria told me there were like a lot of Austrians who was volunteering, like by themselves, just to help the people. They're giving necessary stuff like pillows, blankets, food, whatever they need. So they can do that. But the thing is, in Canada, it's not the same thing, because in Europe they arrive illegally, and the government don't know about them when they get there. So basically, they, like I said, the road they're taking to get there is like really dangerous. They lose their stuff, their luggage, their everything. They don't have anything when they get there. Literally, like some of them just arrive with whatever they're wearing. They lost their luggage. But in Canada, it's kind of different, because like they said, it's nearly impossible to come here illegally, because it's a different continent. So if they're risking like a few kilometers in the sea, they're not going to risk like 700 kilometers.
when they get here, like the only thing they can do, like for example, for people in ISAF that volunteered, they just help you like introduce you to the community and like to blend in and like be part of the Canadian community, introduce you to places, introduce you to people, help you just, you know. And otherwise, there is also very important thing I think people can do, which is having their names on petitions in order to pressure their government to bring more people. That's one of the most important things that they can really actually do. To really try to help.
Great, thank you. Okay, I've got lots of questions for you, Greg, and then I think we're time now, so I'm going to move on to Shayna, and we're going to bring everybody back up. Thanks so much.